The son of the Atlantic, implacable and vast, witnessed countless dramas, but none as silent and disturbing as what unfolded on that day in 1872. Aboard the Dei Gratia, Captain Morehouse spotted something unusual on the horizon, a drifting sailboat, with its sails partially raised, looking strangely familiar. It was the Mary Celeste, a ship he knew well, but which now floated like a ghost with no apparent direction. The approach revealed a scene that would defy logic and haunt the imagination of generations. Upon boarding the Mary Celeste, the crew of the Dei Gratia found sepulchral silence. There were no cries for help, no signs of struggle, not even a face on deck. The hatches were open, the doors unlocked, inviting them into an interior that seemed to have been abandoned in a fleeting and inexplicable instant. The first impression was of a perfectly functional ship, almost untouched by the hand of time or by the fury of the ocean. But the absence of life was palpable, a vacuum that filled every corridor, every cabin. The initial shock gave way to growing perplexity. Where was the crew? Where was Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their little daughter Sophia? The ship was a time capsule of an interrupted life. In the kitchen, a semi-prepared meal rested on the stove, as if the cook had left for a moment and never returned. In the captain's cabin, his personal belongings were untouched. A nautical map opened on the table, a logbook with the last entry dated 10 days earlier, toys of little Sophia scattered on the floor. There was food and water in abundance in the cellars. The sails were in good condition, and the load of crude alcohol was intact. Nothing seemed to have been stolen, nor was there any trace of piracy. It was a perfect ship, but completely empty, a floating paradox that challenged any rational explanation. The crew of the Dei Gratia searched every nook and cranny looking for a clue, a note, any hint of what might have happened. But Mary Celeste kept her secrets with a frightening stubbornness. The main lifeboat was missing, but that alone did not explain the abandonment. Why would an experienced crew abandon a ship apparently in perfect condition with supplies and valuable cargo in the middle of the ocean? There were no signs of severe storm in the days before the last entry in the diary. What forced the crew to leave their floating home? Where did they go? And why did they do it without leaving the slightest trace, without a goodbye, without an explanation? The Mary Celeste was not just a drifting ship. It was a colossal charade, a puzzle without pieces, a dark invitation to unravel one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. On board the Mary Celeste, what was revealed to the eyes of the crew of the Dei Gratia was not the expected chaos of a disaster, but a scene of a strange and disturbing normality. In the captain's cabin, the table was set for a meal that was never eaten. Untouched dishes, tidy cutlery, and even a tea kettle that, although cold, suggested an abrupt abandonment, as if the crew had simply got up and left in the middle of a meal. A pipe, a bottle of machine oil, and a sewing needle lay on the table, indicating daily activities interrupted without warning. It was a frozen photograph of life, but without the protagonists. In the basement, cargo was the next piece of the puzzle. 1,701 barrels of crude alcohol, untouched and perfectly aged, awaited their fate in Genoa. This discovery was crucial because it immediately refuted one of the most obvious theories: piracy. If pirates had invaded the ship, they would have at least taken the valuable barrels of alcohol or left a trail of destruction. The absence of any sign of struggle or stolen goods on board the Mary Celeste eliminated the action of privateers as a plausible explanation for the disappearance of the crew, adding to the mystery. However, a physical track stood out for its absence. The ship's only lifeboat was not in place. His davit was turned out, and the tow rope hung up, suggesting that he had been lowered and possibly carried by the crew. This was the first concrete indication that the abandonment of the Mary Celeste was not passive, but an active decision, albeit desperate. Why would a crew abandon an apparently intact and seaworthy ship to take the risk in a small boat in the middle of the Atlantic? The answer to this question would become the epicenter of all subsequent speculations. The first conjectures naturally orbited around catastrophic events. Would have a sudden storm swept the crew to sea, or a giant wave would have forced abandonment. However, the Mary Celeste, although wet on deck, had no serious structural damage to justify such a panic. Their masts were standing, the sails partially raised, and most of the equipment intact. The absence of an updated logbook, the last record dated 10 days before the meeting, only added another layer of mystery, preventing any understanding of the weather conditions or events that preceded the defection. And here lies the core of the enigma that endures to this day: the complete absence of signs of panic or struggle. Nothing out of place to suggest a hasty and terrified departure. There was no blood, no broken objects, no scribbled distress messages. The order on board the Mary Celeste, in contrast to its emptiness, preventing any understanding of the weather conditions or events that preceded the defection. And here lies the core of the puzzle that endures to this day: the complete absence of signs of panic or struggle. Nothing out of place to suggest a hasty and terrified departure. There was no blood, broken objects, or distress messages. The order aboard the Mary Celeste, in contrast to its emptiness, is the most disturbing evidence. The crew, including Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind a ghost ship that in its macabre perfection shouted a silent question: why and how such an organized life could be abandoned so abruptly, without any sign of panic. This silence echoed across the Atlantic. But if the ship seemed to have been abandoned without panic, where did its occupants go? The real core of the mystery of the Mary Celeste is not just what was missing on board, but who was there. In command was Captain Benjamin Briggs, a 37-year-old man, experienced and known for his prudence and devotion. He was not alone. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, 31, and his only 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, shared the captain's cabin. The presence of such a young family aboard a merchant ship was unusual, but it reflected Briggs's unwavering confidence in his vessel's safety and navigational skills. Captain Briggs's reputation was impeccable, a man who was abstemious, methodically organized, and deeply religious. He was the epitome of the reliable sailor. His crew, made up of 7 men, was also carefully selected, experienced and loyal sailors with no history of mutiny or fighting. There was no evidence of internal conflict that could explain the ship's abandonment. This image of perfect order and competence made the absence of everything even more bewildering. If there was no piracy, mutiny, or an overwhelming storm, what could have led such a wise captain to abandon an apparently intact ship, taking with him his family and crew? The search for answers led us to examine every detail left behind, especially the captain's logbook. Although the last entries stopped abruptly 10 days before the discovery, what could be read before that was of fundamental importance? And of course, the personal belongings. The absence of signs of struggle or panic on the surface was most intriguing, but what if the clues were hidden in more subtle details, in fragments of life left behind? If you're as intrigued as we are with this logic-defying mystery, leave your like and a comment on your favorite theory so far. Upon further analysis of personal items, disturbing information emerged. Some reports suggested that, although the logbook was usually routine, there were sparse notes about strange noises coming from the hold, or an unusual concern with the load of alcohol, which seemed to be reacting more volatile than expected. They were not alarms, but small notes that, in retrospect, could indicate a growing anxiety. Some belongings of Sarah Briggs were also found, arranged in a way that suggested a hasty but not chaotic departure. A small pair of Sophia's shoes was on the bed, which seemed strange to anyone who was getting ready to go out in a lifeboat. These small details, almost imperceptible, began to contradict the narrative of a calm and orderly abandonment. They suggested a decision taken under pressure, perhaps not of an immediate and visible danger, but of a perceived threat or of an event that unfolded slowly but inexorably. Was the ship in a more precarious condition than it seemed? Or the captain's mind, under the weight of responsibility for his family and crew, glimpsed a danger that no one else would be able to comprehend? The mystery of the Mary Celeste, far from dissipating, only became dense with each new piece of information. Despite whispers about the mental stability of Captain Briggs, or any dark omen that might hover over the Mary Celeste, the human mind by its nature calls for rationality. Before the inexplicable, science and logic become the first tools to unravel the mystery, seeking tangible explanations that can anchor the event in our understanding of the world. Thus, the first and most persistent theories that emerged from the limbo of the Atlantic tried to frame the disappearance of the crew in known phenomena, distancing it from any trace of supernatural. The hope was that by dissecting every detail with the coldness of reason, the truth would be revealed, however disturbing. One of the most debated and, at first glance, convincing hypotheses revolved around Mary Celeste's own cargo: barrels of industrial alcohol. The theory suggested that flammable alcohol vapors could have accumulated in the basement, creating a potential time bomb. The captain, aware of the imminent danger of a devastating explosion, would have ordered immediate evacuation. The crew, in panic, would have lowered the only lifeboat, tying it to the ship with a long rope, waiting for the danger to pass. The idea was to remain at a safe distance, waiting for the dispersion of the vapors or the relief of the pressure, then return to the ship and resume the voyage. However, this explanation, however plausible it may seem, stumbled upon crucial facts. If there was an explosion of vapors, even small, we would expect to find traces of fire, soot, or structural damage in the basement, or at least a strong and persistent smell of burnt alcohol. The Mary Celeste, however, was intact. The hatches were open, yes, which could indicate an attempt at ventilation, but there was no evidence of combustion. And more importantly, if the danger had passed, why didn't the crew return? Why would they abandon a perfectly navigable ship with provisions and cargo intact to disappear forever in the vast and unforgiving ocean? Other scientific theories turned to the unpredictable fury of nature. A giant wave, or anomalous wave, could have struck the Mary Celeste, sweeping the deck crew in a flash, or perhaps causing damage that, while not fatal to the hull, would have led Captain Briggs to believe that the ship was doomed. There is also speculation of a submarine earthquake that could have caused such violent agitation that the crew, fearing the immediate sinking, would have panicked and left the vessel in a hurry. The sea, after all, holds secrets and forces that defy human understanding, capable of turning the world upside down in seconds. However, such scenarios also fail to cover all the loose ends. A giant wave sweeping the crew usually leaves a trail of destruction, debris, and in many cases bodies. None of this was found. If the ship was damaged, even minimally, it would not explain the absence of signs of repair or even widespread panic that justified the escape without even carrying basic belongings. The Mary Celeste, we repeat, was found adrift, but in remarkably good condition with her cargo intact. Every attempt to apply the cold logic of science to this puzzle seems to run into an invisible barrier, leaving a void where there should be an answer, and reinforcing the unsettling feeling that the truth in this case may be far stranger than any fiction. All theories, from the most prosaic to the most fantastic, fail at one crucial point. None can sew all the loose ends. The mutiny does not explain the ordered abandonment, nor the absence of signs of struggle. Piracy, although seductive, does not justify why valuable goods, including the chronometer and sextant, were left behind, nor why the vessel was intact. The explosion of alcohol fumes, while plausible for abandonment, does not explain the lack of structural damage or why the men did not return to the ship after the supposed danger had passed. Each explanation, however logical it may seem at first, stumbles upon a detail that unravels it, leaving us with more questions than answers and reinforcing the indecipherable nature of the event. It is this persistent gap, this inability to close the narrative circle, that fuels the flame of the mystery of Mary Celeste. The human mind yearns for order, for logical explanations of extraordinary events. When confronted with a void, she fills it with speculation, the supernatural, the terror of the unknown. The Mary Celeste is not just a ghost ship. It is a mirror to our own fragility in the face of the unexplainable. A reminder that not everything can be catalogued, analyzed, and resolved. He became an archetype, the incarnation of the perfect horror story, where the real horror is not in what happened, but in the agonizing uncertainty of what could have happened. This resonance extended far beyond the annals of navigation. Mary Celeste has infiltrated popular culture, becoming a literary and cinematic icon. From Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote a short story about the ship with a fictional solution, to numerous documentaries, books, and even video games, the story of the missing brigantine continues to be retold and reinvented. He served as inspiration for other ghost ship legends and mysterious relics, cementing his place as the most famous and enduring of maritime riddles. Its influence is a testimony to our eternal fascination for stories that challenge logic and force us to confront the limits of our own understanding. The ocean, vast and merciless, holds secrets that will never be revealed. He is a tomb without tombstones for millions, an impenetrable veil that conceals deep truths. The Mary Celeste is just a drop in this ocean of SW mysteries, a small vessel that for some reason was chosen to become the emblem of all we have lost to the depths. His story reminds us of the immense human insignificance before the indomitable force of nature, and the ability of the sea to swallow lives, hopes, and more disturbingly, the very explanations for its disappearance, leaving behind only the echo of an event that defies understanding. Perhaps the true essence of Mary Celeste's legacy is not to find a final answer, but accept the permanence of the question. The beauty and terror of the mystery lies in its insolubility. He forces us to contemplate the vastness of the unknown, to recognize that there are forces and events operating beyond our capacity for discernment. The Mary Celeste is a portal to imagination, an invitation to deep thinking about the nature of existence, luck, and destiny. And so the ghost ship continues to sail in the waters of our mind, an eternal enigma, a haunting reminder that the greatest of terrors sometimes lies in what we can never understand.